The girl behind the tank. The smoke should have hidden them. That was the whole point of a smoke screen. It was supposed to turn a city street into a gray wall, just long enough for a tank, a few men, and one impossible rescue to cross open ground without being cut apart. But on June 2nd, 2017, in western Mosul, the smoke did not stay where it was supposed to stay. It drifted. It broke. And when it broke, a former Navy SEAL named Ephraim Matos found himself crouched behind an Iraqi tank with a rifle in his hands. ISIS fighters firing from a bombed-out hospital ahead of him, another group firing from the side, and a small girl trapped somewhere in the street behind the dead. That girl was not part of the plan. No one there had woken up that morning thinking the day would become famous. No one thought a rescue video would travel around the world. No one thought a man who had already left the US military would end up bleeding behind a tank in Iraq, trying to save a child he had never met. The rule in a place like Mosul was simple. Do not cross open streets unless you have armor, cover, and a reason strong enough to justify dying. That morning, the reason was 5 years old, and she was still moving. Before Mosul, before the tank, before the smoke, Ephraim Matos had already learned one thing about war that never left him. The worst moments were not always the loud ones. Sometimes the worst moment was a child running toward you. Years earlier, while serving as a Navy SEAL in Afghanistan, Ephraim was assigned rear security during a patrol leaving a village. Rear security sounds simple when you say it fast. You watch the back. You make sure nobody follows. You keep your team from being surprised by the thing they cannot see because they are all facing forward. But that job becomes something else. When two young girls come running down the road behind your unit wearing backpacks. Earlier that day, Ephraim's team had found a child's backpack in the road. It was not just a backpack, it had been rigged as a weapon. So when he saw the girls running, he had seconds to decide whether they were children, threats, or both. He shouted for them to stop. They kept coming. He shouted again. They were crying. That was the part that stayed with him, not because it made the danger disappear, but because it made the danger worse. If those backpacks were rigged, those girls might not understand what had been done to them. If they were not rigged, then Ephraim was seconds away from making a decision he could never undo. The girls stopped before he fired. They turned around and ran back toward the village. Nobody died in that moment. No headline came out of it. No camera caught it. But some moments do not need an explosion to leave damage. That one stayed. After his deployment, Ephraim returned to the United States with the kind of experience most people cannot fit into normal conversation. Bills still came due. Groceries still had to be bought. Phones still buzzed. Americans still complained about traffic and slow Wi-Fi and coffee orders made wrong. Life kept moving. But that image, two children running with backpacks, did not move on. The question behind it was too ugly to ignore. Who turns children into weapons? That question followed him through the final years of his Navy contract. By early 2017, when he had to decide whether to stay in the SEAL teams or leave, he chose to leave. That choice did not send him toward a quiet civilian life. It sent him toward Iraq. There is a version of this decision that sounds reckless if you only hear the outline. A former Navy SEAL leaves the US military. He contacts a volunteer group working near one of the most dangerous battlefields in the world. He packs a bag, grabs his passport, and flies into a war zone without the protection he once had as an active-duty American service member. The missing detail is the one that matters. When Ephraim went to war in uniform, he had a nation behind him. If his team was pinned down, they could call for support. If someone was wounded, there were evacuation systems. If someone was captured, the machinery of the U.S. government could begin moving. In Iraq, as a civilian volunteer, none of that was guaranteed. No formal rescue promise, no American command structure watching his every movement, no certainty that anyone could reach him if the wrong checkpoint, wrong road, or wrong building swallowed him. He knew that better than almost anyone. He went anyway. The group he joined was the Free Burma Rangers, a humanitarian organization known for operating in the gap most aid groups cannot enter, the dangerous space near front lines, where civilians are hurt, but help is still too far away. Their leader, David Eubank, was a former U.S. Special Forces soldier whose work had taken him into conflict zones for years. In northern Iraq, the need was not abstract. Mosul had been under ISIS control. Civilians were trapped inside the city. Families who tried to flee risked being shot. Families who stayed risked being caught in the fighting. Hospitals were damaged. Streets were mined. Entire neighborhoods were carved into sniper lanes. Ephraim arrived expecting to help civilians. At first, that was the work. Food, medical aid, evacuations. Basic human tasks done in a place where basic humanity had become dangerous. Then the fight for Mosul intensified. The Iraqi forces were pushing to reclaim the city. ISIS fighters were being forced into smaller and smaller areas. But that did not make them less dangerous. It made them desperate. The streets became layered with threats. Machine guns, mortars, car bombs, tunnels, mines, snipers, and civilians caught between all of it. Ephraim's role shifted with the battlefield. The volunteer aid workers were no longer just near the war, they were in it. There is a strange psychological line that gets crossed in urban combat. From far away, a city is a map. Blocks, intersections, districts, advance routes, enemy positions. Up close, a city is a hallway with no roof. Every window can hold a rifle. Every doorway can hide a wire. Every parked vehicle can become a bomb. Every street corner asks the same question. How much are you willing to risk to cross 10 feet? In Mosul, that question came again and again. One day, Ephraim and others entered a village outside the city and found a tunnel entrance hidden beneath a piece of plywood. The tunnel led down into darkness. No night vision. No large backup element. Just men with weapons, flashlights, and the knowledge that ISIS fighters had been using tunnels like veins beneath the city. They moved through it. Later, Iraqi forces sealed the entrance. That night, muffled blasts came from underground. The fighters inside had no way out. That detail matters because it shows what kind of place Mosul had become. Danger was not only in front of you, it was below you. By May, the battle had moved deeper into the city. Civilians began fleeing whenever they saw a chance. But ISIS had used civilians as shields. The presence of families made it harder for opposing forces to strike freely. So when civilians ran, ISIS fighters shot at them to stop others from trying. That is the part of the story that has to be understood before the tank. The people running through those streets were not background. They were the center of the war. And by early June, the Free Burma Rangers and their volunteers began seeing something that did not fit the normal rhythm of the aid station. Too many wounded civilians came in at once. Not one family, not one cluster. A wave. People arrived shocked, injured, unable, or unwilling to explain clearly what had happened. Some mentioned a massacre. Some could not speak through the fear. Language barriers made it harder. The number of patients made it worse. The volunteers had to choose between asking questions and keeping people alive. That is how the first sign arrived. Not as a report, not as a briefing, as a line of wounded people who should not have all been there at the same time. The next morning, Ephraim and the team moved north to see what had happened. They reached a large intersection near a bombed-out hospital. The hospital was not a place of safety anymore. It had become a firing position. ISIS fighters were inside or around it, looking down the road, controlling the open ground with rifles and heavier weapons. The volunteers tucked themselves behind a concrete wall. From there, they could look down the street without fully stepping into the kill zone. What they saw explained the wounded. A large group of civilians had tried to escape the day before. ISIS had opened fire. The street was now filled with the aftermath. Among the dead, Ephraim saw movement. At first, movement in a place like that does not mean what the human mind wants it to mean. It could be a wounded person. It could be a trap. It could be a fighter pretending to be wounded. It could be a civilian too terrified to move. Every possibility carries its own consequence. Then they saw her, a little girl. She was alive. Accounts later identified her as Demoa. She was trapped near her mother, hidden among the dead, with at least 2 wounded men also alive nearby. They had been there for hours. ISIS fighters still had the street under observation. Anyone who ran out without cover would almost certainly be shot. The volunteers called out. The survivors did not come. That is the detail that makes the whole rescue harder to understand from the outside. People imagine rescue like a movie scene. Someone yells, the trapped person runs, the rescuer reaches down, everyone escapes. But trauma does not follow orders. A small child who has spent the night among the dead does not respond like a trained soldier. Wounded civilians under sniper fire do not suddenly become fast. They freeze. They stare. They misunderstand. They stay low because staying low is the only reason they are still breathing. So now the team had a problem. They knew people were alive. They knew ISIS could see the street. They knew waiting might mean losing them. And they knew any rescue attempt could turn the rescuers into more bodies on the same road. The original plan had a structure. An Iraqi tank would roll forward toward the hospital. An Iraqi Humvee would follow behind it. The tank would act as a shield. The Humvee would stop near the survivors. Volunteers would get out, grab the girl and the wounded men, load them into the vehicle, and back out. Risky, but possible. Then the plan cracked. The Humvee driver backed out. He said it was not safe. That sentence can sound cowardly from a chair years later, far away from Mosul. It was not that simple. The driver was being asked to drive into a street watched by ISIS fighters toward a hospital full of hostile fire, under conditions where smoke might fail and armor might not be enough. He understood the risk. So did everyone else. But the smoke screen had already been coordinated. The window was closing. The survivors were still out there. A replacement vehicle was not waiting around the corner. Now the choice became worse. Cancel the mission and leave the child where she was, or go behind the tank on foot. Both choices had consequences. One protected the rescuers and abandoned the trapped. The other gave the trapped a chance and put the rescuers directly into the line of fire. Nobody had a clean answer. The tank driver agreed to go. The hatch closed. The volunteers got behind it. Then the smoke rounds came in. For a moment, the street changed. White smoke rolled across the open ground, swallowing the view between the tank and the hospital. The tank began moving forward. Men stayed tucked behind it, trying to keep their bodies inside the narrow moving shadow of steel. Then ISIS started firing into the smoke. They did not need perfect visibility. They knew something was happening. They knew where the tank had to be. They knew the street. Rounds struck around the volunteers. Mortars landed. Fire came from the front, then from the side. The smoke screen bought seconds, not safety. Behind the tank, Ephraim experienced fear in the most physical way possible. Later accounts describe him dry heaving from terror as the tank moved forward. That detail is important because it strips away the false version of courage people like to imagine. Courage is not the absence of fear. Sometimes courage is vomiting behind a tank and moving anyway. The tank reached the area near the survivors. The rescue began. Ephraim stepped out to provide cover fire, while others moved toward the girl and the wounded men. Demoa and one man were pulled back. Another wounded man could not move on his own. The team found a piece of sheet metal and used it like an improvised stretcher. The tank started reversing. The volunteers moved with it. Then the wounded man slipped. He fell into the path of the tank's track. There was no easy communication with the driver. The tank was still moving. The wounded man could not move himself. If nobody acted, the tank would run over him. If someone acted, that person would have to leave cover. Ephraim jumped out. He grabbed the man. He rolled him away from the track. For a second, that solved the immediate problem. Then, it created the next one. Now, Ephraim and the wounded man were outside the protection of the tank. The smoke had thinned. ISIS could see them. Rounds began striking close. The man was too badly hurt to move quickly. This is the moment people argue about because there's no clean version of it. Ephraim had to leave him. Not because the man's life mattered less, because if Ephraim stayed, both men were likely to die there. If he tried to carry him slowly, both men were likely to be shot. If he left, at least one person might survive, and the girl and the other rescued civilians still had a chance. He made eye contact with the wounded man. He apologized. Then he went back behind the tank. Moments like that do not end when the person survives. They attach themselves to the survivor and keep asking the same question in different forms for years. Could I have done more? Was there another way? Did I make the right choice? Or just the only choice I had time to make? The answer does not arrive neatly. The tank kept reversing. Ephraim was hit in the leg. The wound did not destroy bone or sever a major artery, but in that moment, the medical details did not matter. He fell near the path of the tank, and the same machine that had protected him now became another threat. He got up. That is the detail that looks impossible, until you remember what adrenaline does to a body that believes stopping means dying. He got up and kept moving behind the tank. The team reached the original intersection, but the danger was not over. The route back to safety required crossing a small exposed gap in the street. Under normal circumstances, it might have taken only a second. But the smoke was gone now. ISIS knew where they were. The volunteers, the rescued girl, and the surviving civilian were trapped on the wrong side of that gap, unable to cross without being exposed. They shouted for an armored vehicle. The noise swallowed the message. The tank fired. Rifles fired. Mortars landed. Orders disappeared inside the roar. The Iraqi forces on the other side did not immediately understand what needed to happen. This was the false ending. They had reached the intersection. They had the girl. They had survived the tank movement. Ephraim had been shot, but was still alive. For one breath, it looked like the rescue had worked. Then the street itself became the final trap. Ephraim ran across the exposed gap. He had already been shot. He had already escaped the tank track. He had already watched one man get left behind. Now he crossed the street under fire because somebody had to make the Iraqi soldiers understand that an armored vehicle needed to go back across and pick up the others. He made it. The message landed. An armored Humvee crossed the gap. The others were brought back. And when Damoa and the rescued civilian reached safety, the Iraqi soldiers cheered. That is one of the strangest emotional turns in the entire story. A few yards away, the street still held everything they could not save. The hospital was still dangerous. The battle for Mosul was still not over. Ephraim was wounded. The rescued child was in shock. But for a few seconds, men who had seen too much death cheered because one child had been pulled out alive. That was enough. Ephraim was moved to an aid station. His leg was bandaged. He was placed on a cot. Not far away, Damoa sat quietly. She had dark hair. She was small. She had survived something no child should have to understand. Someone gave her food and water, and she ate and drank with the urgency of a person whose body had been waiting for permission to live. Ephraim watched her. A doctor told him her name. Damoa. 5 years old, according to later Free Burma Rangers reporting, and she was going to be okay. That was when the physical part of the rescue ended for Ephraim. The emotional part did not. He pulled his hat over his face and wept. Not a speech. Not a heroic pose. Just a wounded man on a cot, crying because a child who should have died in a street was eating food a few beds away. The footage of the rescue later spread online. News organizations picked it up. People saw the image of a bearded American behind a tank with a rifle, and many treated it like a battlefield clip. Dramatic, shocking, almost unreal. But the image alone does not carry the full weight. A still frame cannot show the earlier moment in Afghanistan when two girls with backpacks ran toward a patrol and stopped just before tragedy. A still frame cannot show what it costs to leave the military structure behind and go into a war zone as a civilian. A still frame cannot show the wounded arriving at the aid station the day before, each one a warning that something had happened up the road. A still frame cannot show the Humvee driver saying no, or the smoke breaking apart, or the exact second when the rescue went from dangerous to nearly impossible. And it cannot show the quiet part afterward. A child eating, a man crying, a name learned, too late to say out loud. Damoa was later reunited with surviving family members. The Free Burma Rangers published an update showing she was being cared for by her grandmother and aunt. That fact does not erase what happened in Mosul, but it gives the story one solid piece of ground to stand on. She lived. Ephraim recovered from the gunshot wound. The injury was serious because any gunshot wound is serious, but it did not end his work. He later co-authored City of Death, a book about what he witnessed in Mosul. He also founded Stronghold Rescue and Relief, an organization focused on protecting and caring for families in conflict zones. The most unsettling question is not whether the rescue was brave. It was. The question that stays open is whether a world should require volunteers to do something like that at all. Because the street in Mosul did not ask for a hero, it asked for a system that had already failed. A child was trapped in the open because armed men used civilians as shields, because aid could not reach safely, because war had turned a hospital into a firing position, and because the distance between danger and help was sometimes only 1 city block wide. That is the part people miss when they talk only about bravery. Bravery is beautiful, but sometimes bravery is what appears after every safer option has disappeared. The thing I keep coming back to is the smoke. At the beginning, it was supposed to hide them. It was supposed to make the rescue possible. It was supposed to give them a wall where no wall existed. But the smoke moved. It thinned. It failed. And when it failed, everyone behind that tank became visible. That was when the truth of the story showed itself. Not in the gunfire, not in the video, not even in the wound. The truth was that one little girl was still alive in a street where death had already done its work, and several men decided that her life was worth the distance. The smoke did not save her. People did. These stories stay with me. This one, in particular, I won't forget.